Ah, I'm here. Yes, Darwin's hamster made a video or two, and I actually saw one of them. And yeah, he's mad at me back from the old days. But anyway, yeah, I'm going to respond to him. He asked a simple question, basically just asking two issues: objective versus, I would say, subjective perception, and how this makes a person behave differently, or how it would change anything about their morality or ethics, whether they attempted to derive them subjectively or objectively. And then will, the whole argument about whether it matters if we accurately describe our will as free or as determined, whether it makes any difference what you think you're doing. And then both subjects, I'd say, yeah, it does make a difference, because you'll be aware of how it's made. I mean, knowing how anything is made gives you great advantage. I mean, if you're playing a sport and you know how the ball spins, and you know the aerodynamics, and you know the force and velocity equations of the ball you're manipulating, well, then you're going to be better at it. You're going to do it better. And so getting it right about what you are, or how your brain functions, I think it's really important. So I'll do the determinism thing first, just because I just decided to do that. My brain made that decision, and it probably just did it because it's an easier word. It just popped into its head first because it's a simple word, determinism, and I'm very familiar with it. And so anyway, yeah, understanding that we are, input-output machines, and that you have to have the input to have the output, that you have to build the character. The character just doesn't arise inside of you. No, it has to be constructed. You have to build it piece by piece. That knowledge is the usual advantage in doing that. And it's usually you got to construct these things out of a deliberate process. It just doesn't come to you. You want to play the violin, you got to practice. And you got to practice a lot. If you want to do it well. And that's just the way it works. I mean, it doesn't just magically arise. Now, some people's brains might be wired so they need less Legos, let's call them, less input Legos to create something, because it works more efficiently. So they can use less parts. They don't need to fail 10 times to learn a lesson. They can fail twice and say, oh shit, yeah, don't do that anymore. They learn better. They're more efficient at learning. And whatever the learning is, whether it's life lessons or physical lessons or a language or whatever it is. And so yeah, people can have various talents, quote unquote. They can have a disposition, a brain orientation that makes it possible for them to more efficiently use information. And a lot of that might be because when they were maturated very young, they were not stressed too much, maybe. There could be a lot of mechanisms that make it more likely that your brain will function better. Maybe if you're high stressed, it'll be disordered, too emotional, it'll overreact too many ways, it won't be balanced, it won't be regulated, for the learning process. So again, we can see how an environment is creating. There's no freedom. The freedom is defined by what flows through the person. And so the best piece of knowledge you can glean out of that, in my opinion, is the knowledge that you have a greater capacity to influence others through your mental construct than you have to influence yourself. That you can bring whole packages of information to other people, where for yourself, yeah, it's all this stuff is there, but it's going to take time. You got to think. You got to, not be distracted by this or distracted by that to maybe get there. But you can be inspired. You can be mused by others. So it's good to understand that your freedom of action is essentially the puppeteer's freedom, the others, the environment, the course of your life, these things are going to control you much more than anything that's generated inside the mixing bowl of your brain. And whatever is mixed inside your brain, again, is going to be made up of the ingredients put in, the disposition you're born with, the environment you're raised in, and nurtured by, and fed by. And that's important knowledge, in my opinion. Thinking that we all have some kind of freedom to escape all bounds of logic and reason, and disposition, and personality, I think that's really just silly. And it applies to the whole idea of justice and punishment. No point in punishing something, even just to make it aware would be kind of stupid. I'm going to punish you till you say uncle and admit you're wrong. Well, there's no point unless there's some future behavior that's implicated. Punishment is a waste of time. Revenge is a waste of time, a waste of suffering. All you want to do is create constructive behavior that will implicate the future in a positive way. You can't undo the past. So there's an example of how you can understand it. You can understand it that you're not punishing things for the sake of punishing, retribution. You're punishing them for the sake of deterrence, to prevent some other brain from thinking it's okay, and to thinking it can get away with it without punishment. You're deterring, not punishing, and you're admitting when somebody is broken. When something's broken and it bites you, or it kills you, or it hurts you, it wouldn't be sensible for the world to say, oh yeah, let's let it do it again. That would be retarded. So anyway, that's how it implicates that argument. I'm not going to have enough time to really finish this. But anyway, alright, so that's enough of the free will crap. The objective morality thing is kind of important. I think really super important to understand where you're getting your ethics from. And it really is objective versus subjective. It's objective from perspective versus your limited, narrow personal incentives, biases, prejudices. So to understand that there is a perspective that isn't you, okay, that's a perspective, okay, that doesn't define something like, I don't really care for fat women. Well, that's my subjective emotional response. It's completely irrelevant to the quality of them as human beings or anything else. It just has to do with what I might consider to be their fuckability. But that is completely irrelevant to their meaning or value. And so we can apply the same judgment to maybe a race bias or some other bias we might possess and understand for what it is. It has no meaning from a pure perspective, from a clean perspective. It only has meaning because of our corrupted subjective point of view. And so I think, again, understanding what is allowed and what isn't, what is legitimate judgment and what is illegitimate judgment, is hugely important. And I think it's just patently logical to say the perspective should be the broadest. It should see the longest term interest. It should see the value has to be calculated in that utilitarian manner. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one, to quote Mr. Spock, and a lot of others. I mean, he didn't invent the idea, he really didn't. But anyway, so yeah, so understanding it from that perspective changes the perspective. I mean, maybe you can subjectively acquire a desire where you gain personal benefit somehow and you're personally gratified by doing hard work for other people. But most people aren't going to be wired that way. And so they're going to have to understand something as a principle from an objective point of view. They're going to have to understand that I might want to take the last piece of cake, but realistically that wouldn't be fair because I took the other last piece of cake, or whatever, it's not my turn, or some other impulse has to correct them and say, well, look, add context, add perspective to this judgment. No, don't just act because you want. You know, and so I guess that's part of the argument. I mean, it's always so hard to get people to understand that a perspective doesn't have to be a being. A perspective is a point of view, an attitude, a conception. So we don't have to have a feeling about everything for there to be a judgment. Obviously something feeling has to be implicated for there to be judgment that means anything or matters. But the judger doesn't necessarily have to have a feeling. And that's sort of the ideal, is to extract ourselves from personal emotion and understand feelings for what they are, understand people maybe for what they are. We know logically of our essential equality. So if we were to have to make a decision about something very important, the objective perspective would show us that nepotism would be a violation, that racism would be a violation, that all these subjective considerations would be a violation of fairness, of honesty, truthfulness. Doing the right thing would likely be compromised if we were to act on our subjective biases and prejudices and preferences and fears and all that crap, and not act out of what we understand to be the maximum potential of the circumstance. What are the implications into the future? How many people will benefit for the price you're going to pay for this? And vice versa. What will the suffering quotient be? And is there some value here that can justify that expenditure, that loss? Yeah, so anyway, so both conversations are important. They're not just moot because we're going to be whatever we're going to be. That doesn't change the fact that the conversation is useful, and I think it'd be useful for the person who is going to change their perspective, obviously. I think it's a mechanism of change. It's just understanding that dynamic. I know it changed me when I let go of my subjective ego, at least for the purpose of truthful conversation with myself. Once in a while I would be honest with myself and say, time to be honest, and time to apply an objective perspective, and I could see the value in that these truths, that it's just a hugely more fair, right, correct, rational, logical way to approach a question is to define some solid premises and apply logic, not to apply emotions, not to apply what do I want the truth to be, what people do I want it to benefit. That's not right. So anyway, I'm just saying that I think the conversation can help lend people to adopt a better philosophy, depending, of course, on your opinion of what's better. But yeah, I don't think they can transition to objectivity or transition to the benefits of understanding the fact that you're reading a script and that you need to nurture your brain and be careful of it, watch it, because you are controlled by these other influences. As much as you think you don't, you aren't, you are. And but these aren't the natural, these aren't the places people go natively or impulsively or through intuition. It's not intuitive to